into urine therapy? What was your health situation? And that was the opening question you went for.
Yeah, I got into urine therapy actually through an accident, quite often unexpected, as accidents are usually unexpected. And I was visiting India for the first time, and I went to an ashram, which is a little monastery in the mountains, and there it's the tradition to do karma yoga, which means you have to do jobs in the monastery, and my job was to carry stones with some other people up the hill. And we did that with a cart, and after about an hour of working, that cart slid off a little hill and fell down, and one stone fell on my feet, on my foot. And one toe was pretty badly hurt, the flesh and the skin was off till the bone, and it was bleeding like crazy, so I had to stumble back to the ashram, and a nurse there put a bandage around it. But as it happens in India, it slowly started to infect. Every time she put new bandage on it, I had about 100 flies on it. So it was not really a pleasant experience. Plus, on top of that, the pain was getting worse every day because the toe was swelling up and it felt like somebody was hammering on my toe. So then it became so bad that people who saw the toe said, like, if it goes on like this, your toe might have to be amputated. And that was not a very pleasant perspective in India, my first time in India for that matter. And on that day I also met a woman, a Dutch woman, and she said, why don't you try a cloth soaked in your own urine around it? And so I did, although I had the thought, like, that's a pretty crazy idea, thinking that urine is also dirty. But she explained me a few things, and I did put that cloth soaked in urine around it, and in a few hours the pain pretty much subsided, and I left it wet on my toe for a couple of days, and after I took it off, a beautiful new skin had appeared on that whole wounded area. The wound was almost closed, and the infection was totally gone. So that was a pretty good first experience with urine therapy for me.
So what was your karma then? Obviously you had to pay a price, didn't you, with the stone falling off your foot?
You mean from which life that karma came about? I have no idea. It felt pretty much that somebody wanted to, that something had to be made really clear to me, and that only could happen through an intense event.
So this karma ashram paid back, actually it was good karma because from that you wrote your book.
Yeah, well, it was one of those events in life where at the moment it happens, you sort of curse, and then only later on I really realized that this accident was sort of a blessing to me, which I could never have thought at the moment that stone fell on my foot, because that was just painful and nasty at that moment.
I would have been cursing, thinking, why am I doing hard labour? What is this?
Yeah.
This is not karma. This is about getting hard labour, but you learn a very good lesson, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
And actually in those days I read the book The Water of Life, because that's the book that this woman gave me to read in those days, and I couldn't move, so I was reading this lying on my bed, and I was kind of surprised to read all this interesting and challenging information in there, and I got more and more intrigued by it.
So, I mean, that was your first point, was obviously putting it on your foot. But so at what stage did you decide to take it further by drinking?
I think the whole stay in that ashram for a couple of weeks, where I went through so many processes and seeing so many things that were entirely strange to me in the Indian traditions, sort of brought me to the point that after reading the book, I thought, like, well, I can imagine to drink it, but it's still quite a barrier to me. On top of that, about a week after the accident with the foot, or 10 days afterwards, I got amoebic dysentery, for which I had to take antibiotics, and I thought I'm not going to leave India alive because it was really pretty bad. And so I had taken antibiotics for a couple of weeks. Then after that I had continuous diarrhea based on the heat and the curry and the bad food that we got. So in all respects it wasn't very pleasant and good idea to try my own urine. But on one morning I thought, like, well, I'm just going to try how it tastes. And at that moment, actually, the taste was kind of appalling because it was very, very intense. A lot of curry spices were probably in there. I was sweating enormously, so it was very concentrated urine, and I left it with that. But I promised myself, once I get back to Holland, then I'm going to do a fasting treatment like Armstrong describes in his book, and then I'm going to, as a preparation, eat a lot of fruits and vegetables before, and then I'm going to drink all the urine that I pass, which I did. And I noticed that once you have a healthy diet and you don't sweat too much, you don't eat and drink unhealthy things, the urine is quite neutral in taste in those 3-4 days, and that got me through the whole psychological barrier in no time.
So how long do you fast for?
For about 4 days at that time.
And what was the outcome? How did you feel?
I felt pretty clear throughout the fasting, a little bit the usual dips with the fasting, but as Armstrong describes in his book, you have less hunger than with a normal fast, and that was also my experience.
So have you fasted longer than 4 days at every
No, I only did those 3-4 days. Yeah.
How did the first book come about? When did it start?
The first book came about because a lot of friends of mine asked me to write a book about it. And I was working in a sort of holistic health center, and they asked me to give a few lectures on urine therapy there. And then people actually noticed that I had already quite some information on urine therapy, so some friends suggested, why don't you put it together in a book? And I did. And it was kind of a project because publishing a book is a whole different deal than dealing with holistic health, and almost everything went wrong with the book that could go wrong. So did most of the publishing work myself, layout, etc., because no publisher was interested. I called a few of them, but they all sort of reacted like, you're crazy if you want to publish a book on this, so nobody was interested.
So this sort of started as a joke, basically, as friends mucking around to go, yeah, let's...
Yeah, and I still have the old book here. I don't know where it is at the moment. But basically a good friend of mine who is a designer, he made a present for my birthday, and he put together with some other friends a few banknotes for as a holiday present in a book where they cut part of the pages out, and they made a cover on which they put the Dutch title, De Gouden Fontein, which is translated to Golden Fountain, with a little drawing with it, funny back story on it, which was actually kind of hilarious. But when I got that present, I thought like, wow, that's fabulous, that title. Now I'm going to write the book. It happened, and of course I had an idea to give people good information, because I had the setup in my head, but because I've been writing things before and publishing, not really publishing, but for my studies, so I know how to make something into a condensed and good structured story.
So did you know about other books about urine therapy beforehand?
No, at that time only The Water of Life was there,
Yep.
that I knew of, and I had heard about the title of Beatrice Bartlett, I think it was The Miracles of Urine Therapy, and that was it. But the only book that I had myself was The Water of Life of Armstrong, and a few of those leaflets which I had collected in India.
So did you think the book was going to take off, or what did you think of when you were doing this book, how successful it was going to be?
Well, I had no clue at that time, and the reactions of the publishers didn't make it look promising.
So what were the problems you had with the first book?
The first book, basically, when I wanted to publish this book, was that I already knew that in order to publish a book you need to have a publisher. So I called a couple of publishers in Holland, and they all reacted like, no, this is crazy, you don't want to publish this, we're not interested, sorry, go to someone else if you even want to try it. So at some point I decided, okay, good, I can publish it myself, and I wanted to make that into some kind of a project, and I talked with a publishing company, a printer company that was actually a printer's company of deaf people. So that made it not easier to publish the book, I must say. And from then on, everything seemed to be on a block. Like when the book was, no, actually before that, when the whole manuscript was finished, It had to be the layout had to be done, and a friend of mine who was a graphic designer, the same one who made the cover of that joke book in the beginning, his computer got stolen the week he wanted to start working on this book, so he couldn't do it. Then I had another friend who had a Macintosh computer, and I did it myself. I sent it all to the publisher, and they were going to print it, and then I got, after a few weeks, all the books back, printed and all, 2,000 copies, and we opened the books and discovered that page 12 was on the place of page 96 and a few other of these kind of mistakes. So all those books had to go back to the printers. Then they corrected the mistake, we thought. We got the whole books back, and we had about 350 books in pre-order. So we controlled the pages and they were all in the right place. We sent out the books, and the next day after arrival we got the first phone calls. Thank you for sending us the book, but when we opened the book all the pages fell out. So there was the next problem. And from then on it was a disaster, because the printer got involved, the bookbinder got involved, they all played each other the card who had gone wrong, and the director of the deaf people's printer company became overstressed and had to quit the job, and I had only covers and loose pages. So by that time I wanted to throw away the whole idea, and but I came up with a solution to do it, to very cheaply bind about 500 pages of this book, and then that had just happened, and a few weeks later we heard about another book on urine therapy being published in Germany with a press conference and all. So I decided to go there, and there we met the author of this book, a quite famous radio journalist in Germany. And she had just published this book, and it's a sort of a compilation of stories based on a radio program that she did 8 or 9 years before. And since then she had received letters on the positive experiences with urine therapy, and she put it together in this book. Same story in Germany. Everyone said she was crazy, no chance to publish something like that, but she had a good friend in the publisher world who was willing to give it a go, and so she did. And on the press conference there was almost no journalist there, but another friend of her was running a TV show, and he invited her to come and talk about the book, and from then on the book went into hyper sale, and it sold over 1 million copies, which is an absolute... Actually this book is I think the best sold non-fiction book in Germany after the Second World War. That says something. So the publisher became interested in the topic because of pure financial reasons, and then they heard that I had just published a book on this topic in the Netherlands, and they gave me a call, invited me over, paid my hotel, and the next morning I had a meeting with the director and a whole bunch of the staff, and an hour later I walked out with a contract.
So what year was it published?
It was published in 1993, so that's already quite a while ago by now.
And then obviously it was republished?
Yeah, there have been like 10 reprints of this book till it reached 100,000. And then I also, on request of the publisher, after I had received a couple of hundreds of letters from people, also a second book on urine therapy, which was more like an A to Z book. Where is it? Where I sort of ordered all the letters based on the complaints that people had had a success with, and also gave them a few extra tips on how to apply urine therapy in this specific condition.
What was your expectations of what you thought was going to happen with the book?
I had no clue, and it was really funny because it also led to a couple of invitations to famous German primetime TV shows, and I had the funny experience of being a well-known person without me realizing it, because one time I was on the NDR talk show, primetime evening talk show, where millions of people look at, and next morning I was walking out of my hotel into Hamburg to do some shoppings, and I came into shops and people were like ticking each other. It's like, hey, he was on television last night, and I got really nervous because suddenly I realized they know me, but I don't know them, and I didn't know really what was happening. So after a few shops, I was walking over the street and a woman was running after me, and she tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, I saw you on television. Can I walk with you for a few minutes?" So of course I said yes, because I didn't know what to do with it. So she told me her whole life story, but that was kind of interesting situation, completely new to me. I'd done really good interviews in Germany, where they always took the whole topic very seriously. I had done a few interviews in the UK, where it was mixed, seriously, and some comic shows. And I had done many interviews in Holland, where it always was more on the funny side, whenever they wanted to have me for a show. And I actually stopped it after I had done an interview on a TV show where they sort of didn't give me the right information beforehand. They agreed with me that they were going to take the topic seriously, but they didn't tell me one detail, and that was that the next one that they were going to interview after me was going to eat horseshit. And he did it for a bet with his friends. And the guy, after, they had done my topic seriously, but to be on a table in a show like that, and then somebody for a bet starting to eat horseshit and sort of repeating what I said, that it was good for all the same things, was kind of like they tricked me into it. And that was being broadcasted to also maybe 1 to 3 million people in Holland who looked at it, and after that I felt like, no, I don't want to do this anymore unless it's really serious.